Hello, this is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service, with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Brought to you by the Capital One Saver Card. With Saver, you earn unlimited cash back for going out or staying in. That's unlimited 4% cash back on dining, at a restaurant, or on takeout at home. 4% back on entertainment, from the front row of a game or on popular streaming from your couch. And 3% back at grocery stores, where you'll find everything you need to make the meals that make their day. So earn unlimited cash back with the Capital One Saver Card. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.
This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jonathan Savage, and in the early hours of Tuesday the 5th of October, these are our main stories. Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram are knocked offline, with more than 2 billion people affected. President Biden calls his Republican opponents reckless and dangerous for refusing to help raise the US debt limit. And as thousands of migrants are deported back to Haiti by the Biden administration, we hear from an island dealing with crisis after crisis.
At least 3 humanitarian crises at the same time. There was an earthquake 6 weeks ago. There are people displaced by gang violence. COVID-19 is still a pandemic with 1% of the population vaccinated to date. Political instability, and we can go on.
Also in this podcast.
Streaming companies are getting a discount on our labor that was negotiated over a decade ago. We deserve a fair share of that profit.
Why Hollywood is bracing for a possible shutdown. What's being called a pacemaker for the brain completes a successful trial. And later... "55 years after first playing Captain Kirk, William Shatner is blasting off for real." It's been a frantic day in Silicon Valley for Facebook. All of its social media platforms, including WhatsApp and Instagram, have been hit by an outage that, so far as we record this podcast, has lasted several hours, completely unavailable over the web or smartphone apps. Here's the reaction of a couple of people in New York.
I love Instagram. It's the app I use the most, especially for my job. So professionally, it's definitely a setback. And then personally, I'm always on that app. So it sucks. It's the worst.
One of my best friends was yelling at me today for not looking at my messages. And I didn't get any messages because the platforms aren't working.
For Facebook, it's more than an inconvenience. No services means no adverts, means no money. Our correspondent John Donnison told me what's been going on.
Well, what's happened is a pretty serious outage for Facebook and its sister companies WhatsApp and Instagram. And what's unusual about this, I think, is that it has lasted so long. So several hours now, these 3 companies, you've just not been able to access them either on your phone or on your laptop. And we don't know the reason why, but we do know that it seems to have affected the whole globe. And Facebook alone has some 2 billion active daily users, Instagram around about 1 billion users. And at the moment, I think Facebook are struggling to fix it. They've put out a statement saying, we're aware some people are having trouble accessing our apps and products. We're working to get things back to normal as quickly as possible and apologise for any inconvenience. They're not getting back to normal that quickly.
No, we heard a few moments ago from some pretty peeved users in New York. John, what does this mean for the Facebook company? What's the impact on them?
Well, I think immediately it's pretty bad news. We've seen Facebook shares fall about 5% today in New York. They've also got these other problems going on at the moment with this whistleblower coming forward. So they're going to be pretty keen to right it as quickly as possible. There are reports of kind of panic scenes at Facebook headquarters of people scramble to try and reboot servers. But I don't think they know the source of the problem at the moment. Meanwhile, some of Facebook's rivals, Twitter in particular, have been having a bit of fun with this. They put out a tweet earlier today saying, hello, literally everyone, because everyone's turning to Twitter to get their news. It's funny, actually, I was out on the streets in London today just speaking to people, getting their reaction. And some people were like, oh, it's terrible. I've not been able to get in contact with my parents today. Other people were like, oh, it's just been nice to have a bit of a break. Some people saying they're enjoying using the good old-fashioned text message again.
John Donnison. The United Nations Security Council, including the United States, has accepted that elections in Haiti will be delayed until the second half of next year. The country is in the grip of its biggest crisis in years. In the last 3 months alone, its president was assassinated and it was hit by a devastating earthquake and a tropical storm. The Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, is under investigation in the murder of President Jovenel Moïse, although he denies involvement. Haiti's troubles have led to tens of thousands to flee the country. In recent days, 6,000 Haitian migrants have been deported back to the impoverished island by the Biden administration after they spent days camped under a bridge in Texas. The security situation is worsening and violent gangs control much of the capital, Port-au-Prince, from where Will Grant sent this report.
As another bus pulls up on the tarmac at Port-au-Prince airport, dozens of exhausted deportees step back onto Haitian soil, many for the first time in nearly a decade. Carrying their weary children in their arms, these are the unlucky ones from the makeshift border camp in Texas, some of the thousands who weren't granted entry to the US. Herded into tents for drinks, medical support and a COVID test, cartoons in Spanish soon appear on a large TV screen. Most of the children were born in South America and are experiencing their parents' homeland for the first time. Among those to emerge wearing a US detention centre-issued blue T-shirt is Daniela Octubre. With her husband, Marc Pierre, and their 3-year-old son, Mateo, the family spent 5 years living in Chile. Mateo was born there. Following a gruelling month-long trek north, including days crossing the thick jungle of the Darien Gap, they made it to Texas only to be turned back to the Haitian capital.
Our friends call us from the US saying, "We made it." All our friends and all those who travel as families made it in. We were the first ones to lose out.
Were you given any explanation, I asked.
Nothing. We didn't get an interview or anything. They only took our fingerprints and photos. Nothing more.
It was clearly disappointing for Daniela, but as we chat in a cheap restaurant, she explains it wasn't the deportation itself that upset her, rather the Biden administration's conduct towards them.
I knew from the start that there were two options. We'd either be let in or be deported. What hurt most was the treatment we received. Sleeping on the floor under a foil blanket, the children sleeping on the floor 7 days without bathing. Having to smuggle a bottle of drinking water into the bathroom to clean myself. Inhuman treatment. Most of all, the chains on our ankles. We are not slaves. Migration is a right, not a crime.
Today is kind of a record day because we are expecting 1,000 people, 4 flights from the US and 1 flight from Mexico.
Back at the airport, the Haitian government and a handful of international agencies give the returnees some immediate aid, including a small stipend of cash. But it doesn't go far in Haiti's crumbling economy. Giuseppe Loprete is the country director for the International Organization for Migration.
They're arriving here with nothing. Most of them lost their ties with their families here. They don't know where to go. They've lived in South America and Central America for years now.
And as we're talking, there's another bus right behind you. This is a sort of constant return then?
Yeah, this is the pace and this is the challenge for us because the situation in Haiti is critical. There are at least 3 humanitarian crises at the same time. There was an earthquake 6 weeks ago. There are people displaced by gang violence. COVID-19 is still a pandemic with 1% of the population vaccinated to date. Political instability, and we can go on.
There's nowhere quite like downtown Port-au-Prince to illustrate the hustle and the struggle that the deportees face on return. It is a bustling, chaotic city centre where street vendors are out in droves. In one corner there is a blacksmith out on the street and people are sifting through the rubbish to find food. having worked so hard to leave this place, it is particularly tough on those who made it into the United States but were forced back.
Some deportees have had a few days to try to find their feet back in Haiti. The Eli family returned several days ago. The 2 children are foreign nationals, born in Brazil. For now, the family is staying at a friend's home in a gang-controlled part of town. In fact, where they live is so dangerous, we had to meet them at a park in another neighbourhood. What now, asks the father, Fengenson Eli. We have nothing. We'll have to travel again. The children aren't even Haitians, they're Brazilians. They ask me, what's happening, Daddy? And I have to say, we haven't got anything here. Life is very tough, he says. Theirs is the story of so many migrants from this complex and troubled nation. They went through hell to reach the United States. Now they find themselves back where they started, this time with no savings or prospects in the one place they did everything in their power to leave.
That report from Will Grant. President Biden has called his Republican opponents in Congress reckless and dangerous for refusing to join Democrats in raising the US debt limit. Defaulting on the debt, he said, would lead to a self-inflicted wound that would take the US economy over a cliff. Mr. Biden called on Republicans to stop hindering efforts by Democrats to rescue the US economy.
Democrats will meet our responsibility and obligation to this country. We're not expecting Republicans to do their part. They made it clear from the beginning. We tried asking to no avail. We're just asking them not to use procedural tricks to block us from doing the job that they won't do. The meteor is headed to crash into our economy. Democrats are willing to do all the work stopping it. Republicans just have to let us do our job. Just get out of the way. If you don't want to help save the country, get out of the way so you don't destroy it.
With more, here's Gary O'Donoghue.
It's never happened before, but America could begin defaulting on its debts in just 2 weeks' time if Congress doesn't find a way to raise the legally binding $28.4 trillion limit. Republicans are demanding that Democrats do it without their support, which would be complex and mean dozens and dozens of votes in the Senate over the coming days. Democrats say the debt ceiling has to go up because of previous spending and tax cuts introduced by Republicans. And usually, they say, such votes are conducted on a bipartisan basis. So there's a standoff, and Washington is waiting to see which side blinks first.
Gary O'Donoghue. Blue Origin, the brainchild of the American tech billionaire Jeff Bezos, will propel into space the actor who played Captain Kirk in the TV series Star Trek. William Shatner, who's now 90 years old, will fly aboard the company's next crewed rocket on the 12th of October. The newsroom's Richard Hamilton reports.
For anyone not familiar with the original Star Trek series, James T. Kirk was the captain of the Starship Enterprise, built by the Federation of Planets in the 23rd century on a 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk, is reappearing aboard the Blue Origin's rocket. But his latest mission will be a lot less than 5 years, about 10 minutes, and will take him just beyond the Kármán line, 100 kilometres above sea level, where he's unlikely to encounter any Klingons. In a statement, the Canadian actor, who will be the oldest ever astronaut, said, "I've heard about space for a long time now. I'm taking the opportunity to see it for myself." If successful, he'll also become the first Star Trek actor to reach the final frontier, with the important caveat, while living.
What is it? He's turned the engines off. Completely cold. It'll take 30 minutes to regenerate them.
Ship's outer skin is beginning to heat, Captain. Orbit plot shows we have about 8 minutes left.
Scotty, I can't change the laws of physics.
The ashes of his fellow Star Trek actor James Doohan, who played the chief engineer Scotty, were smuggled aboard the International Space Station in 2008 by a private astronaut and are said to remain under its floor cladding, having orbited the Earth more than 70,000 times.
All right, here we go, everybody. Thousands of people contributed years to this historic moment. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Blue Origin's first human flight.
Jeff Bezos took off on Blue Origin's first crewed flight in July from its base in Texas. The company is currently competing in a 21st century space race with Elon Musk's SpaceX and Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic to develop commercial spacecraft, make tourism cheaper, and to boldly go where no billionaires have gone before.
That report by Richard Hamilton. You're listening to the Global News Podcast. Still to come.
So you're a tough guy, like you really rough guy.
Last month, Time magazine named Billie Eilish one of the 100 most influential people on the planet.
And next summer, she'll be making music festival history. The US trade representative says China has failed to uphold commitments agreed under a trade deal last year, in the first major sign of how President Biden will tackle the trade tensions with China. Catherine Tai outlined the US strategy for working with Beijing. For years, the world's two biggest economies have imposed tariffs on more than half of what they sell each other. Speaking in Washington, Catherine Tai said the US will defend its economic interests.
I am committed to working through the many challenges ahead in this bilateral process in order to deliver meaningful results. But above all else, we must defend to the hilt our economic interests. And that means taking all steps necessary to protect ourselves against the waves of damage inflicted over the years through unfair competition. We need to be prepared to deploy all tools and explore the development of new ones, including through collaboration with other economies and countries.
I got more details about the US plans from our business reporter, Jonathan Josephs.
Catherine Tai said that she was going to put more effort into enforcing the Trade One deal that was agreed between President Trump and the Chinese back in January 2020. There's also this idea of a tariff exclusion process, which means that American businesses that have suffered for the tariffs that the US has put in place may not suffer any longer. Tariffs may be moved to other products where it's less of a problem. New things will be on the table, things like strategic concerns about subsidies that China allegedly gives to some of its industries, and things like intellectual property theft. And there's also more of a desire to work with allies such as the European Union in tackling China's behaviour on trade.
Now, what about all those tariffs you mentioned? More than half of what they sell each other is subject to the tariffs. What do you think is going to happen to them?
Well, there's no sign that any of those tariffs are going to be removed anytime soon. The world's two biggest economies obviously now in some ways held back by these tariffs that are so widespread. They have had some of the effect, of course, that President Trump wanted them to have, which one point was to reduce the trade deficit between the US and China. That's the gap between what they sell each other. President Trump saw that as unfair, and it has fallen. But trade overall between the two has fallen, and obviously the pandemic has had a role to play in that too. We've heard from the US-China Business Council since this speech, and they said that they want to see these tariffs removed. They also want more focus on getting better market access for their companies in China. So those tariffs are still crucial, but no sign of them moving.
How's this going to go down in Beijing?
Well, I think in Beijing, they're going to welcome the fact that they now know a bit more about what they're dealing with. And there's going to be talks, and that will be welcomed. But one thing that may well irk them was a reference to forced labour in Xinjiang. Now, the US obviously has concerns about that from a human rights perspective, but from an economic and trade perspective, it has the impact of distorting how much it costs to manufacture certain goods. And that means there's unfair competition. And that is at the heart of everything that Katherine Tai is trying to address here in this relationship between the US and China. But it should also be noted that China says that there is no forced labour in Xinjiang and denies all these allegations that are made by the US and others.
Jonathan Josephs. Camera operators, makeup artists and other behind-the-scenes workers on Hollywood films and TV shows have voted overwhelmingly to authorise a strike if their union can't reach agreement with producers on a new contract on working conditions. It would be the first nationwide industry strike in the union's 128-year history and would halt nearly all film and TV production in America. The BBC's Regan Morris reports from Hollywood.
Food and sleep are non-negotiable. We are united on this. There will be no filming.
Hollywood's film production will grind to a halt if camera crews, hairdressers, prop masters, and other craftspeople unite and go on strike. After months of pandemic lockdowns in 2020, Hollywood's film and TV production is booming. But the workers say the hours are grueling and unsustainable, that they don't get adequate breaks to eat, and that the streaming services don't pay enough.
My hours are currently insane. I'm on one of the biggest streaming services, one of their flagship shows. It's over $300 million for the budget. Yet I've been doing most often 9 or 10 hours before they break us for lunch. They do about 70 hours a week. On Fridays, we usually end at 3 or 4 in the morning, and on Monday mornings, I have to be there by 5:30 or 6 a.m.
Thomas Piachakolin is a sound mixer and boom operator. He and his colleagues were outside the Editors Union on Sunset Boulevard, decorating cars with Vote Yes signs. On the streets and on social media, Hollywood's crew members have shared harrowing stories of the struggles they face working in show business. Costumer Jade Thompson says she recently fell asleep at the wheel while driving home after working a nearly 18-hour day.
Got in the car driving back from Santa Clarita and nodded off, and then came to, kind of drifted off to the side and had a panic attack, pulled over. Sometimes you don't even realize until you're already in your car and you're on that long, dark road home and by yourself. I love my job, but it's never worth fearing for my friends, or having group texts to make sure that we all got home safe at night. That's not standard work practice to have to check in with people and make sure that they actually made it home.
The International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE, have long complained about long hours. But the behind-the-scenes workers haven't united to go on strike since World War II.
Mass picketing continues in the Hollywood film strike. Despite restraining orders, pickets still jam the streets, and in 2 days, more than 800 are removed to jail.
The Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers would not consent to an interview. But they issued a statement to the BBC saying that when talks broke down last month, IATSE walked away from a deal which would improve wages and rest periods, pay a nearly $400 million pension and health plan deficit, and increase minimum rates for new media productions. New media includes the likes of streaming giants Netflix and Amazon. Many in Hollywood say it's time to change that classification. Here's set decorator Lisa Clark.
The streaming companies are getting a discount on our labor that was negotiated over a decade ago. And at this point, the level of money that they're making off of our labor, we deserve a fair share of that profit. We deserve to be paid at least what we were paid when we used to do network television.
New media isn't new anymore.
It is not. It is not. The scope of streaming looks like a feature film, but the schedule, the prep time, is so much shorter than a feature film has. The first episode of the show I'm working on right now has 100 sets in it. 100. That's like what a feature film would be shot over 6 months, right? We prepped multiple episodes in 10 weeks.
Can I ask what show you're on?
I'm on a show for Amazon, I'll give you that.
A vote to authorize a strike does not mean workers will strike. Most here hope it will be the leverage their unions need to negotiate a better deal. If they do strike, there's no telling how the entertainment industry or the world will change. The last time Hollywood shut down for a labor dispute during the writer's strike in 2007 and 2008, we had the rise of reality TV and the soaring popularity of its stars, like Donald Trump.
Regan Morris in Hollywood. When your heart needs a little help, an electrical boost from a pacemaker gets it back on track. So if your brain needs a reset, why shouldn't the same principle apply? A so-called pacemaker for the brain has been successfully trialled on a patient called Sarah with severe depression in the United States. Our health reporter, Michelle Roberts, told me about it.
It's a sort of matchbox-sized pack that sits in the bone of the skull, and it has a battery in there and then some wires that come out and communicate with the brain, and it can send electrical impulses to different parts of the brain. And the idea of this is to help her depression. She's had depression for a good 5 or more years, tried lots of different treatments, antidepressants, even ECT, conventional shock therapy, with no success. So the researchers were trying to look at whether there was a different way of approaching this. This gadget that they've got has been used for other things like epilepsy before. But what's different about it is they think they've pinpointed the depression circuits in Sarah's brain. So they found that when they looked at one little bit of the brain called the amygdala, they were seeing patterns that were linked to her mood. So if they got more activity there, her mood was lower. And then if they stimulated another part of the brain in this depression circuit, it seemed to alleviate her symptoms and help her. So this device is there and on all the time, but it only fires when it senses that she's dipping and she needs this boost.
Is that part of what makes it so unique and revolutionary, the fact that it seems very personalised?
Exactly. They call it a closed loop system. So it's sort of a feedback system where you're monitoring but then also treating. Obviously, it's really early work. So this is the first person to have this type of specific therapy. The researchers themselves say they're not fully sure how it's alleviating the symptoms. They want to explore it and look using more people. They're recruiting more people to sort of join in with the work soon. So it is very experimental, but it's fascinating too.
And the million-dollar question, everyone wants to know how soon or even will this become part of our lives?
People have been looking at this type of deep brain stimulation. So the idea of sending electric signals to the brain as a therapy is not new. And it's building on that existing work. So there is the hope that there may be something in this that could eventually be rolled out, but obviously need lots and lots of clinical trials before anything like that can happen.
Michelle Roberts. The Glastonbury Music Festival, one of the biggest in the world, has just announced one of its headline acts for next year, and she'll be the youngest ever performer to top the bill. Billie Eilish, who sings the theme to the new James Bond film, will be 20 when she performs to thousands in the southwest of England next summer. Here's our entertainment correspondent, Colin Patterson.
Billie Eilish is still a teenager until December, but is ticking off some of the biggest British institutions. She's already sung the theme for the latest James Bond film. Now it's been announced that next year the Californian will become the youngest solo act ever to headline Glastonbury, beating David Bowie, who was 24 when he played the festival in 1971. Billie Eilish made her name at the age of 14 with her debut single Ocean Eyes, recorded in her parents' house. Her songs, often with whispered vocals, have tackled subjects including anxiety, feelings of alienation and body issues. Her honesty is what has helped her connect with young audiences. She made the Glastonbury announcement by posting a picture on social media of herself in a baggy Glastonbury hoodie, one of her trademark items of clothing, often taking a stand against the objectification of female pop stars.
So you're a tough guy, like you really rough guy.
Last month, Time magazine named Billie Eilish one of the 100 most influential people on the planet. Over the weekend, whilst performing in Texas, she spoke out against new abortion laws in the state, saying that she was sick and tired of old men making restrictive legislation for women. One intriguing aspect of the Glastonbury announcement is that it opens up the possibility of the festival having 3 female headliners for the first time. As well as Billie Eilish, Adele has been teasing a new album, and Taylor Swift was scheduled to top the bill in 2020 before the event was cancelled due to the pandemic.
That was Colin Patterson. At Actually, that was Taylor Swift. The report was by Colin Patterson. And that's all from us for now. But before we go, you'll probably know about the COP26 summit on global warming taking place in just a few weeks' time. We'll be bringing you a special edition of this podcast to mark that event, and we need your help. We'd like you to tell us what you have personally done to make a small difference in the fight against climate change. Something you've done that others could do as well. It could be anything. Send us an email to the usual address, globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. As always, there will be a new edition of the Global News Podcast later. This one was produced by Siobhan Leahy. It was mixed by Matt Cadman, and the editor is Karen Martin. I'm Jonathan Savage. Until next time, goodbye.